Hey, everybody, thanks for jumping and listening in here today. My name's Andy Drake. I'm the Senior Elite Program Coordinator here for NCSA Baseball, and very excited to have Coach Adam Stevens from Aurora University in to chat today. Coach, how you doing today?
I'm cold actually today. Doing good, doing good though. It's cold over here in Chicago.
I'm in Michigan, man. We got like 1 degree on my phone, I think, when I looked
Yep.
before we started the conversation. So it's pretty chilly over here as well.
Not
But
quite baseball season yet, but we are practicing. So
it's hard to get your mind around outdoor baseball right now. But talk
yeah.
about kind of where you guys are at with, kind of workouts, practices. What's kind of the spring season schedule looking like for you guys right now?
Yeah. So we just are finishing up our first week of practice officially. Our guys are doing stuff on their own all year long or doing different things, but we're just getting through our first week. So if I look tired, there's probably a reason for that. If I'm hoarse, there's probably a reason for that. We're guys are doing a good job so far. And our first game, is about 4 weeks away. Roughly, we usually have 4 or 5 weeks of kind of preseason practice before we start playing.
You guys have had a ton of success here recently. I know kind of itching to get back to that regional this year. Talk about kind of what you guys have been working on this off season, kind of things you've been sort of focusing on to get yourselves back there.
Yeah, absolutely. We're, kind of the expectation, in our program is to get to the regional. So we weren't, unfortunately able to do that last year. So that's kind of what all our eyes are on have been on since the summer, basically. So we're guys are working really hard, a bunch of returners this year, which is exciting. And also certainly, talented group of newcomers as well. So trying to mesh that all together, and don't think they're quite sick of me yet, but they probably will be. Probably will be soon, So we see a lot of each other, this time of year, So, but it's a good group. I'm excited about
Awesome. So for our families who are listening in on our chat today that maybe aren't as familiar with Aurora, tell us a little bit more about the school, the program. What makes that baseball program special? What's great about the school? Give us some insight into Aurora
Sure.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a Division III school in the suburbs of Chicago, western suburbs of Chicago. Just a tremendous private school academically, but also baseball tradition wise, probably one of the best overall baseball traditions in the country. If you look at the last 30 years or so, 30, 40 years of the program. So a lot of really rich history, great alumni base, high expectations, and super competitive program. And we're trying to live up to those standards every year, but also hopefully try and push them a little bit higher as well. So it's a fun challenge. And we're trying to do it again this year right now.
It's a really competitive region for Division III baseball as well. I think for a
Yes,
lot of families, it's interesting to think about Division III, where for just about every other level of play, the powerhouses are kind of your South and your West and
yeah,
your warm weather. But Division III,
sure.
it's not so much like that. So kind of talk about your guys' conference and the region, and who some of the other really top programs are that you guys bump up
Yeah,
against every
I
single
mean,
year.
you're exactly right. I mean, some of the best, college baseball programs at our level are in the Midwest. Certainly the East Coast has a lot too, and certainly the West Coast does. But there are so many great programs in, the Illinois, Ohio, Missouri, Minnesota, Michigan, Iowa area, and a lot of good ball players, and that kind of gets into the recruiting talk, a little bit, just kind of, trying to find the right fit, and I think not getting to, the good Division III teams in the country. If you're a nationally ranked Division III team, if you're in the top 50, if you're in the top 75, whatever, you they are absolutely as good as anybody. Now excluding like, maybe the SEC or the Power Four, that's a little bit different, scenario maybe, but compared to anything else, there are a lot of very good players at our level. And you can see that through the guys that are, playing pro ball or, able to move on to other things with the transfer portal, for example, and things like that. So, it's all about finding that right match.
Things have changed a lot, and I want to get into some of that with you. I appreciate you bringing some of those things up because I definitely want to get your perspective on these. So, like in the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen a huge shift in just college recruiting landscape
Yeah.
in general. How have you kind of navigated that at Aurora? How have you kind of maybe experienced a little bit of some change and sort of who you go after or what kind of players are available for you? Talk about kind of the transfer portal, all these kind of things. How have they touched your world, and how has things kind of adjusted there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, you definitely have to adjust, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's maybe, I also feel like you can maybe adjust too much, if that makes sense, either way. So I think you have to have, I believe you have to have a really good freshman class every year, and then I think that's so important in long-term success and retention, and all those things are really important in success. And then, hopefully you can, take advantage of the maybe a few more transfers out there by finding some guys that are good fits that kind of can plug in where you might have a need or something. And I think we've had some good success with that. Hopefully we did this year as well. And a lot of times they're guys that maybe we recruited out of high school, that we just missed out on them for whatever reason, and then maybe the grass wasn't greener, type of thing. And we've had some success with guys like that too. So um, the thing with the transfer thing is you really don't want to transfer twice. So like you have to make sure that you're finding, you're a little older, so you kind of have an idea maybe more about what you want or what you don't want, or you've kind of learned the hard way, maybe what you were thinking was wrong, or something. So you try and find a good, a good match.
With a lot of families, we really help our families really kind of navigate this new world as well and kind of understand how to have these conversations. And a lot of families see that some guys have success, like, oh, we see guys go to D2s or D3s or NAIs and they transfer up. That's a delicate conversation though to have with someone like you, right, in the recruiting process.
Sure.
Like, hey, are you going to help me
Yeah.
transfer up? Like, that's not probably part of the conversation necessarily. So how do you kind of handle when families
Yeah.
maybe bring up those topics in recruiting right now?
Yeah. Families definitely bring
Oh
that
yeah,
up
yep.
for sure, to us on visits and, phone and things like that. And I think, and I get why they do. So I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't begrudge them for that, at all. Um, and, one of our former players, it was actually kind of a unique scenario, graduated in 4 years, was a 4-year starter, had that extra COVID year, wanted to get grad school paid for. He played in the Division I College World Series last year, so, that, what a great, situation for him. But, to me, I think the big misnomer with that, personally, just kind of get on my soapbox here, is that in order for that to happen, you have to be really good. And in order to be really good, you have to play as a freshman and sophomore and do really well as a freshman and sophomore. And that's difficult. That is really difficult at our level to be able to do that. So certainly we've had guys that have done that. We had an All-American right fielder as a freshman 2 years ago, and he's still here, and but so I think sometimes it's like, oh, go D3 and play and move up. Well, it's not exactly as easy as that, because in any good program like we've been, or like all these great Division III programs in our area, to play as a freshman is a real challenge. And you have to be pretty good and find that right scenario to do that. So I think that's kind of the big misnomer. I'll just go there and play. Well, maybe, and we're cool with that. If you're good enough, hey man, we'll put you out there, but it's just a little more difficult sometimes than I think some people, realize, I guess, if that makes sense. So
And I think what maybe a lot of people maybe misunderstand too is like you're trying to build a culture there as well, right? Like obviously there's
yeah,
going to be some guys that come and go, but like we're a 4-year school. We're trying to find
yeah,
people that want to be here ultimately for 4 years if that's the right fit for them. Like that's really the culture you're building. Anything that's kind of outside of that may be a little bit, maybe not as much of a fit, right? As perhaps like a junior college or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, absolutely. And keep your best friends, your teammates that you start to play with. And a lot of times, like, you don't want to leave that. You like what's going on, you're getting a good degree, you're playing, you're winning, you're having success with your best friends. That's a pretty good scenario. That's what we all probably shoot for. I have two sons that hopefully are in that situation someday. And it's like that's what I hopefully they can do too. So um and I think that, when you're a senior in high school, it's sometimes hard to know what you want or what you don't want. And I think that kind of gets into, some things maybe to look for in the process, and some, things that I always recommend to recruits, that I think are, really important to try and avoid you know, a decision that, you regret, down the road, which, is going to happen, but you try and put all your, try and get it straight so you don't do that if at all possible.
Best case scenario is at least we want to dive in with both feet. If it doesn't
Yeah,
work out, we can figure it out, but don't go in with
yeah,
one foot in and one foot out, right?
yeah, absolutely. And like no big surprises.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the big thing when you show up somewhere. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, you probably should have known that if you would have been, been a little more thorough, whatever that is, So, and I think that's, be very thorough, I think is extremely important.
So on the flip side of that, now we've seen obviously with some of the changes in the Division One level with the revenue sharing programs that now
Yeah.
have to go to 34, right? So all of these roster
Yeah.
spots, it kind of starts to trickle down now. Have you seen the level of play increase? Have you seen the competitiveness for the roster spots, even for you guys, increase? Because it's just there's a lot of really good players that maybe 10 years ago they might have been on the bottom of the roster at one of
Yeah.
those programs, but maybe they're not
Yeah.
now, and now it kind of trickles down. Have you kind of seen that as the competitiveness just overall seem to increase across all levels, you think?
I think so. Absolutely. I think that especially in recruiting, there might be a few more, kind of top level type, players that are there still that maybe wouldn't have been there, 8 years ago or something. Just because, the maybe the Division One schools are, filling up their roster with more transfers and less freshmen and so those kids have to, are available. Right. And then, the junior college thing, the Division 2, Division 3 NAI, those schools are trying to take advantage of that, trying to take advantage of that if at all possible. And definitely especially the last probably 3 or 4 years, I feel like that's, definitely been the case.
I mean, the reality is, I think for a lot of families, it's hard to get their mind around that. Hey, there are Division 3 programs that probably have two or three or four guys at the top of their rotation that are in the 90s, right? Like this is
Yeah,
not like out of the norm anymore that there are guys like that even at those levels. Now, maybe they weren't when they got there, but they got
sure.
a place to play and they were able to develop into that. So it's as you said, it's really hard to go anywhere as a freshman these days and play. So
Yeah, it is. I think and trying to avoid kind of that, like, you know, go somewhere where like you're going to be not trying to impress necessarily somebody on social media, with the commitment announcement, but more like, well, what's it going to be 6 months from now? Like, where are you going to be at, and like, where do you want to be at? And what's best for you? I think is something really important to think about.
for sure. Coach, I'd love to get some insight into kind of how you guys build recruiting and kind of how you get your
Yeah.
list put together, how you identify players. So first of all, like,
Yeah.
if you were to think about like what does an Aurora type of guy look like? If you guys are out and about, you're looking at a recruiting profile, or you're seeing a guy at a showcase, or you're looking at a player that you've gotten a recommendation about. What is it that stands out? What are the kind of things that you look at that say, yeah, that's somebody we probably want to get to know a little bit more about?
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with, academics, probably. I mean, and that's pretty much the way it is at every school. That's one of the first things that you have to at least look into, right? Because um, not, if that's not there, it's not that we can't recruit them, but it just becomes a little bit more of a challenge from a academic scholarship perspective. And so those things are always, one of the first things. Now certainly we look at, love recruits that are playing shortstop, center field. Obviously, we need a lot of pitchers as well, certainly, but just good athletes, leadership qualities. Love to watch them running on and off the field. Just little things like that, I think are really important. And we get out to we typically don't start recruiting uh, kids until their senior year, or at least their 17U summer. That's really where it all starts for most schools at our level. Um, and we're getting out to 17U tournaments, and watching a lot of games, and talking to coaches and having relationships with different programs that we've been at before and kind of know what, and that's really where it starts. And it starts, trying to find a bunch of really good players and then just trying to connect and get them to campus. And that's really where it starts. You typically, like, maybe junior high school, spring, maybe a little bit, we get out there, but more in that summer. That's really where it starts for most schools at our level. And even at the Division 2 level, there may be timelines a little bit before that, but not much. So
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for the 27 class, it's pretty open for you guys right now. You're really just kind of building a
yes.
big board of names and database and kind of figuring out who do we want to begin to identify to go see then.
Yep, go to all there's a tournament in Indianapolis, every summer where there's about, 717 U teams or something like that. So and we get to those, every weekend, and then that's really where it all starts.
So you guys are in a pretty fertile area for recruiting, being in that
Yep.
greater Chicago area, tons of really good baseball players. It's a big
Yep.
population area too. Kind of talk about like your geographic reach and like what you guys look at. Do you pretty much just kind of stay within that area and feel like you have a lot of success there? How do you identify players further away or if players that are further out? How does that conversation start?
Yeah.
Like how much do you go after that? So kind of talk about sort of just the geographic reach of where you guys are generally looking.
Yeah. For us, typically, like our roster's probably like 75% Chicago area, generally speaking. I think, it'd be crazy to not recruit this area. There's some great high school programs, great travel programs. Um, so we really try and recruit, the Chicago area suburbs, really, really hard. But we also certainly branch out. We've had, guys we have a freshman from Georgia on our team right now. Just kind of happened that kind of happened, reached out, we liked him, nice kid, good player, and he wanted to come be cold, I guess, so he had to buy a winter coat here a little while back. But Colorado, Arizona, California, Florida, we've had guys from all those areas. So because there are in a lot of states there aren't schools like us, like like the Division III type school, in a Colorado or in an Arizona. And there's some really good players where, you know, a school like us would be great for them. So they have to, find ways to branch out and to look at schools like that. At least give it a look at it as an option, so that it's out there. And we've had some success with guys like that too.
Do you guys ever travel to those kind of areas, or is it typically
Yeah.
more like, hey, that guy just kind of reaches out, or we find him and just kind of start, or do you guys ever get out to those kind of areas?
Well, yeah, we do like maybe if a tournament in Arizona
Mm-hmm.
once in a while or something like that where there's a lot of West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
maybe down in Florida, even on spring break when we're out playing sometimes in Florida or Arizona, we'll run around and see if we can get some names or something. But a lot of times too, like I mentioned our freshman from Georgia, like he just kind of reached out, and we really try and look at that stuff, and sometimes it doesn't exactly work out, for whatever reason, but sometimes it does, and I think that's important to think about too, is to kind of look at how you do that, how you reach out to schools that you're interested in. And I know that's what you guys help with a lot with recruits.
For sure. And with having a lot of success that you guys have, if someone is looking at Division III and they're open to that level, programs like yourself will pop up as like, oh, all right, they're on the rankings and so forth. So even if it is someone that isn't
Yeah.
quite as familiar, it doesn't hurt to have guys
Yeah.
identify you that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that, guys are like, I want to, I want to win. And I
Yeah.
love when they say that, man. I'm like, all right, let's go. So
Yeah.
I think that's, something to think about.
For sure. Coach, just change gears a little bit here for just a second. I
Yeah.
always love for families to hear a little bit about other folks like recruiting journey. So I know that this for the
Yeah.
two of us here, this is a long time ago. Feels like maybe a
Yeah.
lifetime ago. But take yourself back in the day a little bit. How did you identify kind of like your opportunity? What was your recruiting process like there? And then just maybe a little bit about your early coaching days. How did you kind of pick up things that you learned to kind of get where you are
Yeah.
today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a long time ago now for me. It's about 20 years ago. But
uh,
yeah, I mean, I think, it's so important to like start early. And by early, I think, because I didn't do that. I
mm,
feel like I didn't quite know what to do, when I was in high school, but ended up getting a, decent, finding a really good place. But um, that junior year, summer, junior year, spring, at least I think you want to start thinking. And sometimes, your high school coach, your travel coach, if they're honest with you, can give you some like, some, hey, here's maybe where you should look, because they kind of usually have a pretty good idea about that kind of thing, or getting, some consulting advice from people that kind of know this is the scenarios and stuff. But I think that's really important. And then, start with a big group of schools, and then just start to kind of whittle that down based on interest, based on their interest, based on all kinds of things. How are you playing in the spring? How are you playing in the summer? What do you want to showcase? Like, what are your strengths? And I think those are things that can really catch a coach's eye, I think sometimes. Whatever it is, if you were an all-state football player, or if you're a valedictorian, or if you're a team captain, or if or if you throw 92, or there's all these different things that you can really try and showcase and highlight, to try and catch people's attention. I think because you probably have to do that more now than ever before, maybe because there's just so much, the recruiting has changed so much. So you do have to sell yourself a little bit, I think, and would definitely recommend that to guys.
We go back into our days, it was like the 90s. It was VHS tapes, right? We didn't have the
Yeah.
ability to put ourselves out there. Like
Yep.
you're exactly right. Like at your fingertips, you can go on Twitter or
Yep.
go on NCSA or whatever, anything like that, and you can find thousands of players that could potentially be out there and see all their information right then. That wasn't the
Right
case
there.
for us, right?
Well, it was not the case. Yeah, the big video camera and trying to like figure out how to send it to
uh,
people. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, so Coach, you before you got to Aurora, you had a really nice run there at Central as well. Again, just a little bit of like, what are some things you picked up along the way? Just kind
Yeah.
of your coaching journey, things you've learned, things that you've been able to like, maybe like mistakes you've made or things like
Yeah.
that you figured out about yourself now as a coach. We're always learning, but what are some things you picked up or figured out along the way?
Yeah. Definitely made some of those mistakes as a young coach. Yeah, I was hired at Central College when I was 24 years old, my first
Yeah,
head coaching job.
real young.
So, I had no idea what I was, doing or in for at that point, but just kind of, learned along the way. I think, and really tried to apply. We ended up being really good at Central there my last, 5 or 6 years, and took all those lessons and really applied them here, I think, and at Aurora. And I think that well, but we're always learning. I think we really, I think being, looking at more than just baseball talent, looking at more than just just the well-rounded. We love guys like that, good personality that are going to work hard and are good teammates, and like that stuff is just worth its weight in gold when you're trying to, win at a high level, I think. And we were just talking about that at practice, and I think that's something that we really look for. And I think as a recruit, you can showcase some of those things, and like when coaches are watching you, and it's not all about going 4 for 4 that day necessarily. Maybe a teammate's struggling and you go pick them up and you give them a fist bump, or help them out in some way. Man, that's just is important to me. We're already there watching you, so we already like you, but boy, you do that, that's maybe you go for 4 or 4 strikeouts, but to me you went 4 for 4, because you're showing that you're a good teammate. So so there's always those things to to think about. I think that's maybe didn't do as much of that early, and
Mm.
trying to look more at that now, I think is really important factor.
You're trying to find guys you want to be around, right? Not
Yeah.
just game day, right? But like,
Yeah.
the in between times of being on the bus and all that stuff. You're trying to
Yep.
find guys that are a good fit for all those scenarios.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like
Yep.
sometimes we meet with a recruit and we're just like, man, I like that kid. He just kind of brings some personality and energy, and liked what he asked. And so like being prepared on those visits, I think, is something to really, think about, and have a few questions ready that don't either like come across well, I guess, if that makes sense. And I think the individual visit, I think, is just really important. Sometimes we'll be like, man, we want that dude, like that, what a stud, certainly a good player, but boy, I really like him. And sometimes that may not happen, for whatever reason. So those are, I think being prepared for those visits, I think, is a really important factor too at most places.
You talk about the college visits in particular, though usually by the time you get to the point where there's a visit being extended or
Yeah.
scheduled together, you're pretty much like, we're just really trying to establish, like, do we want to, on either both sides, we want to kind of make this happen. Like, it's not that the
Yep.
kid has to show up on the visit and sell themselves, right? It's more about, let's just continue to get to know each other further,
Yeah.
right? So it's usually not
Yep.
that like a sales thing on a visit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just kind of getting to know each other, just having a
Hmm.
conversation. Like, what are your interests? What are you into? Like, and then, we can take a lot by maybe what questions they ask too, and like, am I going to play right away? It's like, it's just like, well, let's talk about that, So, what are your motivations? Like, why are you interested in us? And I always tell them, like, now the job after that visit is to, like, you continue to get to know us, we continue to get to know you, and let's see if it works out. And I think And that's through phone calls, although those, text messages usually more now it seems like with guys, but and just kind of, following up and talking and a little message here and there. And those things that's kind of how that relationship builds because that is still important in the process. I think that's maybe a big change. I feel like that gets lost a little bit sometimes, but getting to know the coaching staff and I think is really important because you're going to see us all the time, right? So you want to, and then how you check on the coaching staff, how you verify that they're are what you think they are, is through the players, through the current players. I mean, that's one of the biggest things we always talk about in is to get away from the coaches, get away from admissions counselors and faculty, all those old people, get away from that and hang out with the guys in the team for a little bit. Whether that's an overnight visit, some places do that, whether that's just going to a practice, going out to dinner with the guys afterwards and going playing video games in the dorms, or something like that. And that is as valuable that as anything you can do, in your recruiting process, especially when you're narrowed down, because we always tell them like, hey, you can ask them anything. We're not there to like judge your questions. We're not there. You can literally ask them anything. Hey, what's Coach Stevens really like? Which is I recommend you ask that about the
Mm-hmm.
coaches you're looking at. And here's the thing with college males. I know one thing for sure about them after coaching them now for a long time, right? I always say this, like they have opinions and they like to share those opinions. So like so they will tell you what they think, and they're not going to sugarcoat anything. They don't know how to do that, So they're, that's like that real info that I think is really valuable in that process. And I think you will find out a lot about that program, a lot about that school. If now it takes a little extra time to do that and maybe extend your process another month because you got to go out and do it, go see the campus again or something. But I think you find out so, it's like you got to do the official tour, but you also at some point when you're have to do the unofficial tour. And that's kind of like to me, it's through the players, and I think when you do that at your top couple schools, you'll have a really good idea about those programs by doing that, I think. And then you
Absolutely.
also kind of find out what types of guys, what are in that program, what's the culture like when you kind of hang out with them. And a lot of times it's like, I like those guys, or yeah, I don't know. Well, that's really important to figure that out, before you choose where to go.
And yeah, we did a very similar schedule when I was coaching. When we would have us like essentially a follow up overnight, and it was
Yep.
always that was usually a clincher for a lot of the guys. Especially if
Yep.
they were leaning one way or the other, we could usually get a good clinch because our guys were great and could talk to them for
Yeah.
sure. So yeah.
And then we'll ask our players too
Mm-hmm,
after
mm-hmm.
that, hey,
How
how'd it
how
go?
were they? Yeah.
How'd it go? And it's like, oh man, this guy would be great here. He fat, or like,
Yeah.
coach, here's what he said, or something like
Yeah.
that. Not that
Yeah.
it's like make or break, but
Mm-hmm.
it like
Mm-hmm.
at least it gives us more info and
Yeah.
the more info the better for both sides, I think, during
Absolutely.
that process.
Absolutely. So just real quick on the timeline, on your guys' timeline, coach. So you talk about kind of getting guys on and getting to know your players, build your list and so forth. When do you start kind of scheduling those initial
Yeah.
visits? When do you kind of start to extend maybe a verbal offer to a guy? When is sort of like, here's our decisions that we'd like to have. Here's kind of our deadline where it's like, we probably can't get any more guys. What is kind of your sort of typical year kind of look like when guys are going through that admission and
Yep.
visit and
Yep. And
ultimately
this is where
decision
a
process?
lot of schools are different with that admissions
Mm-hmm.
process a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I think like at our level, it kind of starts in the summer. We'll start, some 17, going into your senior year, some visits like mid to late summer, typically. Maybe we've seen you play a couple times and, you're in the area or something. And then certainly early fall, we have a lot of visits early fall. Whether it's a Saturday visit or whether it's during the week. We have all lots of visits that September, early October typically. Then we encourage guys to come back if they like to, just kind of what we were talking about, just to kind of get the other side of the program. And I'd say like, the timeline has really changed. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like at our level, the last 5-8 years, it used to be, we have most of our class, pretty much done by the new year, I'd say now, and I think, we're never done, but there's always, some, few. popped up, here this week. But um, the it used to be like, early spring. We were still really during the season, but now, I think you can get financial aid sooner now than you used to be able to. The FAFSA's changed a lot. That's had an impact. Um, and there's maybe less opportunities. So guys are, really trying to get out there and, and figure it out sooner, which I think is a good thing. And maybe less multi-sport athletes, I feel like. So I think that always is, maybe kids aren't playing football as much, which I don't like. But so we love multi-sport athletes. But so, I think that timeline's changed. But usually I'd say like for us, I'm just trying to think the last couple years between like Halloween and like January 1st is probably when we get the bulk of our commits. Um, and everyone's on a different timeline though, and I think I always recommend to families to kind of put a timeline out there for yourself. Like put a date out there where you want to decide because, and then try and like mesh that with the schools that you're looking at because sometimes you want them to match up, and if they don't, then you got to like figure out how you're going to do that. So be thorough, don't be pressured, but also like push yourself to like get out there and get it done too.
For sure. All right, coach, one last thing and then we'll
Yeah.
maybe wrap some things up. But when you think about like your interaction with recruits, you've talked about some things that are really good, right? That like recruits do well or this stands out.
Yeah.
What are some red flags over your years in
Mhm.
recruiting that have kind of stood out? Maybe two or three that have been like, yeah, those things that happens, it's kind of like, ooh, we might be off that guy. And again, there's always different like anecdotal things, but kind of more broad like red flag sort of things that families or recruits
Yeah.
may do that are like, maybe not kind of our guy.
Yeah. I mean, I think, having relationships with people and coaches and different, travel organizations, and maybe, I don't know, this kid does this, that always is a little bit of, but I like to meet the kids personally. I like to kind of decide that for myself in a lot of ways, but we do take certainly perspectives and advice from people that we know. And that's more like the not the baseball stuff, but more just like the work ethic and the attitude and the that kind of thing. I think is really important. And then I'd say like um, you know kids that we love kid where the coach is just like this kid's a great worker. He's not an issue. He works hard every day. I love, wants to win. I love that, personally. But then I'd say like on visits, just like, maybe talking smack about a current coach that you
Mm,
have or like a try like that always is kind of like we don't love that, because that's probably going to be us someday. So just things like that. I think being respectful and um understanding just kind of the things that are important, like what do I want to accomplish and where do I want to go. So I think getting advice and coming with some good questions, I think are really important.
it looks like you've done your research, right? If you have questions,
Yeah,
it gives you as a coach the impression that hey, this guy may be genuinely interested versus, we
yeah,
were just another one on their list.
yeah. And I think the other one, honestly, is like just like the first question
Mm,
within 5 minutes is like, who's your shortstop? I'm a shortstop.
mm,
What grade your shortstop in? And it's like just go for the visit here. We'll talk about those things, but just like find a good program and a good school,
mm,
then we can like get into some of that stuff down the
yeah,
road a little bit. And
yeah.
I think because that stuff is important. Don't get me wrong, it is, but like you also, I see a lot of guys choose maybe a school just because they think they might be able to play early, and end up being miserable, and then like would have been great at another program where maybe it would have taken a little more time, but still you end up, it's a long 4 years is a
Mm.
long time, so but we also, so those things are always, I think, important things to think about.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, this has been awesome, coach. One last thing I just wanted to ask you about or just have you share any funny story from your playing days or coaching days that just kind of a
Yeah.
funny anecdote to wrap it up here today.
Well, that's a great. I have too many to even comment on, probably. But I'm just trying to just look at a picture. One of our dog piles here a couple years ago when
Mm,
we clinched a conference tournament title to get to the NCAA tournament. I had a boot on. I had like surgery on my ankle. Kind of had a boot on the whole season. So the team, third out, boom, worked. Everyone's just out of the dugout. Well, I couldn't run out there. I'd like to go celebrate too. I think we always tell our guys we want to celebrate the wins, and I jumped on the back of one of our assistant coaches, and he took me out there and then just threw me onto the pile. So that was that was a memorable one there. I had to boot on a little bit longer after that too because I think I hurt myself again. But
I was
the
gonna, I was
yeah,
gonna say it's a little risky.
it was a little risky, but hey, man, that's what we work for, you know. So
That's right.
um, we're trying to do that again.
Awesome. Well, Coach, this was great. I really appreciate the time today. Good luck as you get started with your season, and love to get you on for another conversation soon if you'd be up to
So,
it.
yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Coach.